Hey everybody, welcome back to the Plays and Fades YouTube channel. I'm your host, GORDO Gambles. Welcome back to their full card breakdown. This time for UFC Vegas 87, we have ourselves Rozenstruik against Gaziev. And what is a interesting main event clash, to say the least, and overall a pretty wild card. You know what? I'm trying to make a positive spin on this. This isn't my favorite card in the world. You know, there's a lot of short nose replacement, a lot of large favorites, and a card that is going to be a very tough puzzle to solve on DraftKings. However, I do think it's one that we're happy to have fights on the list on Saturday, and I'm going to make the most of it, try to make some money along with this video. So, as always, the video should be timestamped. Expect me to break this card down from bottom all the way up to the top from both a DraftKings and a betting perspective. And with that out of the way, hit the like button down below, subscribe to the channel. Let's do this. We get the fight night started with the 17-5-1 Loic Radzhabov versus the 15-3 Abdul Karim Al-Selwady. And what is a pretty fun 155 matchup, actually. This is one of two bouts. Well, three now with the new odds, but one of three bouts out of 11 that are actually lined close enough. You know, one where the favorite isn't minus 200 or more. This is actually a pretty closely lined fight. We have Al-Selwady coming in and making his debut off the Weight Contender Series, where he was a massive underdog, but pulled off the upset against George Hardwick. There he displayed some good counter striking, the ability to wrestle, and great cardio here. He's with a guy, Loic Radzhabov, who has had multiple performances in the UFC. The guy's 1-1 inside the UFC. He has, you know what, had a good performance and a not so good performance, including last time being stopped by Rebecca in that second round. Rebecca has gone to the top, not putting too much stock into that, but what Loic Radzhabov is he's a shorter fighter of this weight class, but constant takedown threat, very powerful in that very first round, and he is a threat to go out there and either have finishing potential or score a ton of takedowns. The problem with him is his cardio is not necessarily there. His durability is also in question after he saw him rocked by Rebecca, even dropped by Ribeiro in that fight. But we have seen flaws from this guy. I don't think he's necessarily the best minute win either, but he can go out there and land a ton of takedowns and be a threat to score well on DraftKings. Al-Selwady wasn't really highly touted. I mean, we did not know much about this guy, especially considering we saw him knocked out in the first round 3 times. That's how he's lost fights, is he's been knocked out early on, and I still think that durability is a concern. But what we saw in Weight Contender Series was an incredible balance of cardio, minute winning ability, and counter striking. And he showed that not only can he go out there and counter strike against an elite striker like a guy in Hardwick, but he can win minutes. He's shown to be a good offensive wrestler as well. We haven't seen him too much off his back, but he is someone who looked to have decent physicality and ability to push through adversity. Against Hardwick, I don't know what to draw from that, because that looked like a completely different fighter than what we saw on tape. I mean, if you look at that all the time, he wouldn't have been a plus 300 underdog. But what we got now is a guy who really exceeded expectations, and now is coming in as a pretty big favorite against a guy who has fared well in the UFC. And based off that last fight, I'm very tempted to pick Al-Selwady here, because I do think he showed an incredible ability to push through the fight, win minutes, be the better overall technical striker of the two, as well as have the physicality to stay on the feet. But there are some questions to be answered. I don't really know how Al-Selwady performs. I mean, that was a one-fight sample size. How is he going to perform when Radzhabov's on him, shooting a ton of takedowns? There are a lot of questions to be asked, and at this point in time, although the chin and durability is still a concern from Al-Selwady, I still have questions to be answered. I am still slightly going to lean him in this fight here. Although Radzhabov is dangerous, he's more dangerous early on. We have seen him drop, we have seen his cardio fade, so if he can't get that first round finish, I trust more the cardio of Selwady. I trust the ability to go out there and win minutes with his technical striking, and with the striking defense of Radzhabov and his ability to be hurt, I think it is Al-Selwady's fight as the fight goes on. Loic can win early. Again, we have seen Al-Selwady drop, so that could be a path to victory for Radzhabov here, but in a day, the pick is going to be Al-Selwady, and I do think he is able to get it done. On DraftKings, this is going to accrue a ton of ownership, just because this fight is actually playable. 8.4K, 7.8K, you can get to both these guys instead of the 9.7 for Umar up top or the other guys like that. There are not many fights in the mid-range, and this is one you can actually get to. Radzhabov rates out as the much better play. Again, he has shown that he has 11 takedown upside. He scored 128 Ribeiro in that regard. He also showed that he has explosive first-round power. He's a guy who can be finished. I think Radzhabov has the better ceiling of the two. But when there are so little underdogs and when there is so much heavy favorites to go out there, I do think Radzhabov's going to be a guy who's going to be high owned. I think people are going to want to play into that upside. And if I'm picking Al-Selwady here, maybe I want to be a bit under-owned to Radzhabov. Now, that's just coming from me as someone who's playing a bit more entries here. If you're going in there single entry, Radzhabov rates out really well because he has takedown and first-round finish upside. He is a good GPP play. Although, considering the ownership, considering all the other factors I mentioned here, I think Al-Selwady might be a better pivot option up top. I think this could be a fight you avoid as a whole just due to the ownership it accrues. Al-Selwady could very much go out there, counter-strike his way to a 60, 70-point decision win, not score optimal, and you could get a huge leverage over the field there. All this to say is, yes, Radzhabov rates out really well, a bit better than Al-Selwady, even though we have seen Radzhabov slow down later. I do think the first-round finish equity goes to Loic. Either way, not my favorite fight overall to target, despite it rating out really well. Now, this next one is one of my favorite fights to target. 19-3 Vinicius Oliveira, 11-2 Fernando Sopaj. Sopaj coming in on short notice. Lion King he was a pretty big underdog to get things started, but people have watched his tape, me included, and we've seen that this guy is a true UFC level talent. They signed on short notice, and I do think it's going to make for one of the best scraps on the entire card. This fight is going to be very, very fun. Like I said, Sopaj coming on short notice. He's making this debut here. We haven't seen him in the Contender Series. He fights out of Sweden, out of All-Stars there with Kamzat, but a guy who was training for a fight this weekend, so I do think his cardio is going to be in shape. This is the weight class he fights at, so we don't have to worry about any Kwambo things here, but this is still a fight where I think he's going to have a very good matchup. He has power in his hands. 10 of his 11 wins have come inside the distance. He is a very good opportunistic finisher as well. Not only has he shown great counter ability, a ton of power in those hands, but a good offensive takedown game as well as having that one decision win, allowing him to show that he does have the cardio. He rates out as a pretty good prospect. I mean, he has all these things behind him. Phoenix Oliveira, too, was a guy who had a very favorable matchup last time. A bit tougher opponent in front of him in Sopaj, but a guy who still is lying the favorite here. Oliveira is a guy I found on the Dana Contender Series. I wasn't the highest on him overall, because I do think he has flaws in his defensive striking, and overall his best attribute is his athleticism, but he had a matchup in the Dana Contender Series that made me bet him. He got his win there, and now he's in the UFC, and I do think there's going to come a time to fade Oliveira. I do think that this could be it here, considering how, although Oliveira is very, very good offensively, poor striking defense, he can be hit, he can be put on his back as well, and he's also a guy who we've seen damaged and knocked out before, and I do think that this could come back to haunt him, but there's no denying that offensively he's a specimen. Great power, great striking in his hands as well. He has shown explosiveness that really comes with that athletic build he has. I do think that optics-wise and cheering for fighters, he's someone to look out for, but he is not the best technically sound defensively, and I do think that will get him caught in the future. At the end of the day, I think it's an extremely fun matchup, and although Oliveira could go out there and use that athleticism, use those optics to score points early on, Sopaj, I think, is going to be the better technical striker of the two. I think he's going to have the ability to counter and damage Oliveira, whereas I've seen Sopaj's chin hold up pretty well. I do think he's able to counter Oliveira and score points with damage, and on the ground, I do think he may have an advantage there as well. Either way, all this to say is I think this is a very, very closely lined fight. The line is kind of correcting itself, and I am going to be picking Sopaj in the spot here. DraftKings-wise, one of my favorite fights on DraftKings, and there's two sides to this. Number one, Sopaj, like I said, I'm picking him in the spot here. I think he has finish equity, and for that reason, with a card with not really many underdogs, he might be one of my only underdogs I pick. He is going to be one of my favorite spots to target, just because he is one of the only underdogs I like. I think he's going to have a ton of outside score very well. I like him. But then we have to realize that I'm not alone in this thought, and that at 7.6K, a guy who is now minus 120 on a card full of massive underdogs, he is going to be the most popular player on the slate. 7.6K, 50%, 55%. Like, this guy is going to be extremely high owned. So if you're playing tournaments and you want to get different. Play Oliveira. I think Oliveira is still very alive to win the spot. He is athletic. He does have one-shot knockout power. This is a spot for leverage to be able to go to that. If you're only playing single entry and you're going out there, or maybe even cash, I do like Sopaj because out of all the underdogs, I think he's the best chance to win. I like his technicality, his striking prowess, and I do think he wins this spot here. So 7.68, he rates out very well. But if you're trying to be different, go towards Oliveira or fade this fight completely, because Oliveira still is very dangerous in his own right, and you could get him at a much lower price tag compared to Sopaj here. Either way, give me the guy on short notice here. Give me the underdog in Sopaj, and I do think he gets it done. Next up, the 9-1 Christian Leroy Duncan, 11-4 Claudio Ribeiro. Two guys I'm not very high on. I faded Ribeiro a couple times with Kopylov and Al Hassan, and I'm going to do it again here. Christian Leroy Duncan is a guy who had a ton of hype coming into the UFC, and it's kind of fizzled down a bit. He himself is a very aggressive striker. He has shown good takedown defense, good toughness and durability, but he doesn't always throw the combinations together. He lacks volume sometimes, although he has that forward pressure and terrific power in his hands. He was a bit lackluster in his one loss in the UFC, and he can be a bit gun-shy. When he lets his hand goes, he is a dangerous specimen. I do think he has striking to put at anybody. Good cardio, good durability as well. He is a very, very good prospect, I still think in this time, despite the hype kind of being gone. Claudio Ribeiro is kind of a round one or done kind of guy. Ton of power in his own right, decent grappling, but no cardio, no durability. If you can't get that first round knockout, he's going to fade and he's going to get knocked out. We saw him knocked out twice so far in the UFC, both by KO. He was able to KO a guy in Holmes that second round, but Holmes is not UFC level and nowhere near the level of Christian Leroy Duncan. For that reason, I picked Christian Leroy Duncan on a card full of favorites. I do like Duncan a lot this week just because I do think he is someone who you can back. Although Ribeiro's path to victory is rooted in a KO, I've seen nothing but good durability from Duncan, and I do think Duncan will continue to go forward, be the more technical guy, the more defensively sound, and have the ability to go out there and win this fight as the fight goes on. I do think this is Duncan's fight to lose. I do like him here. On DraftKings, we have to really assess this upper range. A ton of heavy favorites and guys who could score very, very well. I kind of like Duncan. 8.9K, although he doesn't have much grappling success, scored 120 last time against Dennis in a performance I think he could really duplicate here against Ribeiro. At 8.9K, he's one of my favorite options up top. I do like some other options we're going to talk about, but I do think he wins this fight at a high clip. I do think he has finish upside, as we've seen Ribeiro finish before, and I do think that at 8.9K, he has just as much upside as some other people who may be $600, $500 more expensive than him. So I do like Duncan this week. Ribeiro is a GPP play, a dart throw, because if he wins, it's going to score very, very well. I just don't think it happens very often. Give me Duncan. Next up, 14-0, Javid Basharat, 10-2, Ayman Zahabi. Canadian boy, but not with a very favorable matchup. Another minus 900 favorite here. Javid Basharat, and there's not much to say about this. Javid Basharat is a highly touted prospect, very solid fundamentals in all areas. Great ground game, great striking, great durability, cardio. He'd be a very well-rounded prospect, and although he hasn't really had the finishing come out so far, he has shown an extremely versatile attack, being able to really solidly beat all his opponents so far. I do think he's a very well-rounded skill set. He's able to take you to the ground if he has to, but incredible versatility on the feet, striking with all weapons, hands, knees, kicks. The guy is talented, and he is a very good minute winner at that. Ayman Zahabi is getting a bit up there, an older fighter, but a guy who is really rooted in that counter-striking. A ton of power. We saw him knock out Arichi Lang last time, a guy who can win fights, a guy who can be a very terrific counter-striker, but he doesn't win minutes as well. And in a fight like this where we have two guys, one of them who's a solid minute winner with good durability, never been finished, versus a patient counter-striker who relies on that power shot, I understand why Basharat's a favorite. Basharat will have the ground advantage, the volume edge, and although the technicality is kind of there for Zahabi, when he throws as little as he does, I do think Basharat has the edge there as well. I like Zahabi, don't get me wrong, but he's a guy who is, like I said, low volume, mostly rooted in knockout success, and I do think Basharat has the advantages in many aspects in this fight, making the pick here. No hot take. I want to find some reason for Zahabi, but with the durability we've seen of Basharat, the ability for him to take it down to the ground, and the fact that I do think he'll be winning minutes the entire fight, I don't really see a path to victory for Zahabi all too often. I do think Basharat wins at a high clip. Now, the question then comes down to, can you play Basharat at 9.5K? It's tough to. We've never seen him top 100 points. He's at 9.5K in a slate full of killers. He is going to be a very low-owned option for a good reason. I do think he's not someone to go to too often. If you want to be different and hope he goes out there, grapples, and has maybe some submission upside on the mat, he could be a good contrarian play. That's all he is this week. I do think this fight as a whole is one that's going to be fought at a slower pace, where Basharat should win a lot of the time, but outscoring Klein, Umar, Anders, Erceg, Mokaev is going to be a harder task. One of my least favorite options up top, although he does make for a good contrarian play. Next up, 24-1, Ludovic Klein, 11-3, AJ Cunningham. Short on his bout. Not much to say in this one. I'm not the biggest AJ Cunningham fan. He's making his debut here, though, but Dana White Contender Series did not look good. Got rocked, got finished in that second round, and all the guys extremely durable, so hittable, really slow striking, and his ground game looks lackluster as well. What he is he's a durable fighter who looks to push through adversity, has decent cardio, and will look to just break his opponents. He doesn't have the most power in his hands. He doesn't have a very versatile submission game, but he has toughness, his ability to push forward, his ability to bully his opponents, really. And what he's getting in front of him is a Slovakian sniper, a guy who made his living on the regional scene with head kick KOs, knocking out people, a guy who is very technically sound and will be the way more powerful fighter of the two. And what you don't want to have when you're AJ Cunningham against a guy in Ludovic Klein is poor striking defense, and I do think Ludovic Klein's able to piece apart AJ Cunningham wherever this goes. Ludovic Klein has looked a bit improved. He's shown a ability to mix it up on the ground as well, showing that versatility. Still has an incredible technicality in the feet, good kickboxing, good head kicks as well. And I do think when it comes down to defensive aspects, Klein is so much better defensively and technically offensively on the feet that he should be able to just pick apart Cunningham for as much as he wants to, has the power to get the finish, and even sprinkled in some ground success. Out of everyone on this card, he is one of my favorite picks to win. I do think he's able to go out there and win this fight at a high clip. I do think Klein is a much better fighter here, much more seasoned, and I do think he goes out there and has success. I'm predicting an old school head kick KO knockout because we have seen Cunningham rock before. I do think that is a possibility, and you'd like to see that. But the question comes in is, can you afford him at 9.6? Historically, he hasn't scored that well. Only scored above 103 once, and at 9.6K, it's a high ceiling to hit. But I still think this fight has some opportunities. Just because Cunningham walks forward, can eat a bit of damage, but is ultimately able to be finished, I do think Klein's able to get a finish with decent volume, just as how much Cunningham can eat. And if he has to, Klein, I think, can take him down to the mat and have success there as well. The way that I see it getting a bit different here is, although I say Klein wins this fight a lot of the time, the only way Cunningham wins is if he's able to break the cardio of Klein, and we've seen Klein slow down before. I think Cunningham, it would take almost a miracle, but if he wins this fight, he has a very, very high ceiling compared to the people down below him. At 6.6K, you're just trusting his chin to hold up, you're trusting him to push through adversity, and you're trusting him to go out there and make Klein tired, and he has the opportunity to do that. He is a dart throw, again, at 6.6K. I'm not going to have much of him at all, but I do think if he wins, he scores very well. I do think this fight's a decent one to target on DraftKings. It's hard to get up to him at 9.6K, but Klein's a guy who I think has him covered everywhere. Should be a fun fight. Then the prelim headliner, 15-8, Eric Anders, 13-10, Jamie Pickett. I almost abstain from talking about this fight. Not a good one. Two fighters who I'm not very high on, but let's break it down quickly. Eric Anders, athletic guy, former football player. He's going to have an advantage in a lot of spots here. He's a pretty tough guy. Will go forward, has a good clinch game, good ground success as well, and will be the more active striker of the two. Jamie Pickett, although a bit more reformed recently, is still a guy who is not a good UFC fighter. I mean, we lost to Frem, Dennis Tulian, Kyle Dawkins, Jordan Wright, Tefana Jikwi. The guy has not had a good run in the UFC, and he is a pretty low-level UFC fighter. I think this fight's just between two guys who haven't really panned out. Anders does rate out as a better prospect, but to make him 9.3K, to make him this big of a favorite over anybody is tough to say. At the end of the day, Pickett's still going to have his range. He can still pitter-patter from the outside, but Anders has the better ground game. He has a better clinch control, and he lands the more powerful shots. I do think he's able to go out there and potentially find a finish, throwing with as much power and athleticism as he does, but an ugly fight as a whole, not one I want too much involvement in, and even on DraftKings, don't really want to get there. At 9.3K, I mean, Anders, he scored 118 against Dawkins, but aside from that, has never really reached 100 points. Is very content to go out there, get 80-point decision wins. He scored 55 against Mearshart. I think this could be a slower-paced fight, the same way that Jamie Pickett's fights can be, and sometimes Pickett just stays in there, stalls out, and loses decisions. So I think this could be a very ugly one, and if that's the case, I'd much rather have an Erceg or a Klein that I just talked about than having Anders at 9.3K. Complete fade fight for me. Not a biggest fan of this one, and I'm happy to move on. Next up, much more fun fight here. 16-7, Matt Schnell. 11-1, Steve Erceg. Super fun fight. Matt Schnell, danger, is a guy who definitely brings that inside the cage. A guy who I've liked to back unders-wise, but a guy who's a pretty fun fighter. Very killer, to-be-killed style. He's put on some incredible performance like he did in that Fight Night performance against Sumaderji, one of the greatest fights in second rounds you've ever seen in your life, but a very, very fun one. And he's facing Steve Erceg, Astro Boy, a guy who's kind of burst onto the scene as well and has reeled off back-to-back wins. I do think this is a fun fight. I do think it's one where Matt Schnell does have that killer to be kill style. He can finish anybody. He can fight through adversity. The guy is very dynamic, solid power on the feet, incredible submission game. I do think he's dangerous, but he thrives in chaos. He's kind of like a Brandon Royval type, and what he needs is opponents to either fade or be caught with something. And although Erceg is a guy who, you know what, you can catch sometimes, Erceg is extremely durable. I think he's very cerebral in there as well, thinking through his processes, and I don't think he's going to give the Schnell an opportunity to capitalize on any mistakes. I do think Erceg has him covered there, and I do think Erceg is able to find a finish. Erceg himself is very versatile on the ground. I do think that he's able to neutralize the offensive and potent ground game of Schnell here, and on the feet, I do think Schnell is better striking. And on the feet here, I do think Erceg has a better striking defense. I do think he can go out there and capitalize on the hitability of Schnell and potentially land another knockout blow. I think it's a very, very high-paced 125 bout that could be very, very fun while it lasts, but considering the killer to-be-killed style of Schnell and the durability of Erceg, I'm picking Erceg here. I do think he gets it done. Should be a fun fight, but one that I do think is one to target on DraftKings at 9.2K. Erceg has not scored the best, but has not had a finish win so far. If he's going to get a finish win here, it's probably against Schnell, a guy who has been finished in a lot of these losses, whereas Schnell, 7K, when he wins, he scored 115, 92, 101, in his finish wins. I do think he's going to have to capitalize off a mistake from Erceg, because I do think Erceg wins more minutes. I do think his path to victory also scores very well. So another fun fight. I think it's fought at a high pace. Erceg is a good contrarian play. I don't think I like him as much as a Klein or a Duncan, but on a very high-paced fight, I do think he is a very safe floor, better cash play of the two, and a fight that could be a very entertaining one. Give me Erceg. Next up, 16-0, Umar Nurmagomedov versus 17-1, Begzat Almakhan. Can't pronounce his name to save my life. Apologize to Mr. Begzat for that one. But you know what? A fun fight. Regardless of the minus 1,200 price tag, I do think this is one that could be fun. No one wants to fight Umar. They give him a debutant. What an interesting conception, because the guy could be fighting for top 5 right now and he gets his debutant. A guy who I don't think is that bad. This Kazakhstan prospect is still young, 17-1, good record, fought good level of competition. I do think he has a very good fundamental skill set, very good in and out movement, very good striking. He has shown competitive striking in exchanges, good durability, decent offensive wrestling, but no matter how much I can praise this guy, he's facing a guy in Umar Nurmagomedov here that, you know what, we haven't seen anyone solve the puzzle, and it's not like Bekzat's going to go out there and be better than Raoni Barcelos was. Like, Bekzat, although he's looked good, has looked good against a poor level of competition in the regional scene. And although he's looked good striking, I still think Umar's going to be quicker. I still think he's going to have more power. I still think Umar is more technically sound. And on the ground, Umar's a phenomenal wrestler who can work through positions and even have the ability to get submissions as well. And that's the one thing we have seen for Bekzat is I do think he will be at a large disadvantage on the ground, and Umar will be able to take over there. At the end of the day, do I agree with the minus 100 price tag? Not necessarily, because I do think Bekzat can compete at the UFC level. I do think he will get UFC wins, but do I see him beating Umar too often? I don't. And for that reason, I am going to pick Umar. No hot take there. I do think Bekzat can have some success. You know, he's able to go out there, strike, stuff some takedowns. I do think he himself is explosive. He can stand and trade, have good volume, but Umar can neutralize it. I do think that the question comes down to how long can he survive? Because, you know what, the under is set pretty low. Everyone expects Nurmagomedov to steamroll him here, and I don't know if that's necessarily the case. I do think Bekzat can earn some respect. Either way, on DraftKings, this is a tough one to get to. 9.7K if you want a safe cash play. He's minus 1,200. He scored over 105 in every bout. Umar's a guy you can go out there and get, and you can have a lot of success doing so. I do think he has ground success if he wants to go there, so 2 takedowns, a second round submission win with 60 strikes, that still scores great. The question is, does it outscore Ludovic Klein, Eric Anders, Steve Erceg, Mohamed Mokaev, Vitor Petrino? The list goes on. At 9.7K, it's extremely hard for me to get to him. I don't really like many underdogs this week, so I'm kind of getting away from this one. Yeah, it's not what I want to get to. I would want Bekzat if I had a path for him, but I don't see one all too often for that reason. At 6.5K, he is also a punt play. You're also surviving for him to get rounds. I'd kind of rather, you know what, maybe even a Jamie Pickett at this point, just considering I think Pickett's able to survive early on. Like I said, skill for skill, I do think Bekzat much more talented than Pickett, Cunningham, Zahabi. But at this point in time, he's facing Nurmagomedov, a guy who should be fighting top 5. Tough to pick him here. Tough fight in general. I hope it's a fun one, but give me Umar. Now, I hope this one happens. 24-7, Alex Perez, 10-0, Mohamed Mokaev. Perez hopefully makes his way to the cage because, you know what, he has been a standout for standing out of fights, if that makes sense. Not a guy you can trust too often to make it to the cage. Mohamed Mokaev, a young phenom, a guy who's been able to go out there, rattle off a 10-0 record, and look very impressive in doing so, and it keeps on taking step-ups, which I respect. A young guy has battled through incredible adversity. You know, it was losing fights at Tim Elliott, comes back, pulls off that win, was almost knee-barred by Fialho there in a very close fight. I think he's a guy with a ton of heart, ton of determination, and a pretty good skill set. Alex Perez also, I think, is pretty skilled. I mean, he was at the top for a reason. Wins over De La Rosa, Espinoza, Formiga, even going out there and running off a good couple wins before, running into Figueiredo Pantoja in his last 2. But either way, a guy who we haven't seen too much about him, right? We haven't seen him win a fight since 2020. We've only seen him inside the cage once since 2020. He got steamrolled in like a minute by Pantoja. There's a lot of questions to be answered by Perez. I do think as a whole, he's a better volume striker than Mokaev. I do think he could go out there and cause some problems, be a very live underdog, because he can also scramble very well as well. But I think at this point in time here, considering I've seen more of Mokaev recently, I've seen his hunger, I've seen his drive, determination, I can trust Mokaev to go out there and get takedowns. I can trust his heart to be in the game, and I can trust him to want this more. Whereas we have seen Perez give up his back, be submitted in his last 2, and I'm not comparing Mokaev to Pantoja and Figueiredo, but I do think that the path is there. I do think there's some wrestling upside for Mokaev. I don't think Perez has the same awkwardness or takedown, let's say, reversals as a Tim Elliott. I do think Mokaev's able to go out there and have success. But if we get the Alex Perez of old, who's training hard, who was the same guy he was back in 2018, 2019, I do think he's the tallest test to date for a guy in Mokaev who can go out there, have a ton of volume, go out there and pose problems for Mokaev. And for that reason, it's kind of interesting. And as a whole, although I'm picking Mokaev because I've seen more of him recently, Perez is a very interesting dog at 7.1K. I do think he's a guy who can go out there and, again, at his best, give a fight to Mokaev. And we saw Mokaev go out there, go to the 3rd round with Malcolm Gordon, go to the 3rd round with Elliott, go to the decision with Fialho. If he goes to decision, he'll have a ton of volume. And I do think at 7.1K, he has the best chance to do so when we're comparing him to, a Jamie Pickett, Ayman Zahabi, Matt Schnell. So Perez is very intriguing for me this week. I think you have to look at Mokaev. He averages 114 points. The guy scores very well on DraftKings. And with his high takedown upside and his ability to finish, I do think he's a guy to look for as well. But I do think Perez is an interesting option just because you want a safe floor. I think favorites are once again going to be very popular this week, and if that's the case, you need to find the underdogs with the highest floor. And I do think Perez is a guy who can, again, at his peak, pose a lot of problems, maybe even win this fight and score well. So he's a guy I'm definitely looking at. Very interesting matchup. The pick is Mokaev to see more from him. I wish Perez was fighting him at his prime, but at this point in time, I'm picking Mokaev, picking his wrestling upside, picking his determination to get it done. Co-main event time, the 10-0 Vitor Petrino, 10-4 Tyson Pedro. Fun fight, actually. Tyson Pedro, 10 wins, has never won a fight outside the first round. All first round finishes, very dynamic. Good takedowns, good counter-strike, and good power. In the first round, Pedro is terrific. He's like a Terrence McKinney, right? He's got good skills early on, but he fades down the stretch. He also hasn't looked the best with his volume recently. We haven't really seen him have that same takedown success, but he is a guy who we know have the skills. Vitor Petrino has fought a very low-level competition, but has absolutely steamrolled them. Knocked out Modestas Bukauskas last time in the second round. Dominated against Prachnio, and then fought to a very close decision against Turkali, where he's able to go out there and score 7 takedowns. The guy is a phenomenal athlete. He's shredded, a ton of power in his hands, and he also has the ability to finish fights in sync with that power. We've seen good cardio from Petrino. I think as the fight goes on, it favors him, and that's why he's the favorite. But I do think Tyson Pedro throws a different, let's say, wrench to the plan early on. We've seen Petrino rock in that first round. We've seen him be able to be taken down. Turkali had a lot of success against him there, and I do think early on, Pedro is extremely dynamic. Pedro's going to have the opportunity to have finished potential and score very well. At the end of the day, I'm picking Petrino because I think he can be a proven winner down the stretch, but I'm very tempted to pick Pedro. I think it's a very close fight. Petrino still has a level to show. I mean, we haven't really seen him really fight the best level of competition. This will be his tallest test yet. So if he can survive this first round, I do think he has a lot more success. The Pedro in that very first round has good takedown offense. And you know what? I kind of hope he has success to see Petrino off his back, to see Petrino face adversity. And for that reason, I think it's one where Petrino should win as the fight goes on, but I have more interest in Pedro early on. On DraftKings, again, if I do not think Petrino has as much first round success, like, you know, Pedro's only lost after the first round. If Petrino doesn't get a win until round 2 or 3, at 9K, he's hard to get to. I almost prefer a Duncan, an Erceg, a Klein. This is the same argument I've had before. And if that's the case, give me the round 1 upside of Tyson Pedro. 7.2K when he's won fights, scored 106, 102, 108, 116, 110. Those are some phenomenal scores. The guy is very, very dynamic. Like I said, all his wins coming in the very first round finish upside, both on the mat, on the feet. That's his path to victory. That's going to score very well. And him and Perez are my 2 cheaper options I prefer a lot. I do think Petrino wins this fight at the end of the day. I do think he's able to take over the fight goes on with the volume and cardio, but early on, as Pedro's world, for that reason, another fun underdog target on DraftKings. And then to our main event, the 13-5 Jairzinho Rozenstruik, 12-0 Shamil Gaziev. I just bet Martin Budai against Gaziev. I don't think he's that good. His cardio's not there at all, and now he's facing Jairzinho Rozenstruik, a guy who has main evented a lot, has fought the best in the world, but who has looked pretty awful recently. Rozenstruik's a guy with a ton of power in his hands, great kickboxer, but no ground game. And although Gaziev has so many flaws, and one day we're going to expose the fraud, he's got power. He has shown a competent wrestling game, and he's a big boy. No offense to Biggie Boy, who's big as well, but I do think he is someone who could be punted from top position, who could have some success. So I think I'm going to side with Gaziev here. I don't want to. I still think when he faces a guy who can wrestle him and test his cardio and survive the later rounds, he's going to have the ability to be exposed. But when we've seen Jairzinho Rozenstruik really finish in the first round by Almeida, finish in the first round by Volkov, taken down and destroyed by Blades and Gain, I do think that the forward pressure, the power, and the top control and ground game of Gaziev can be a real threat, and I do think he's able to go out there and get an early finish. That's kind of what I see as being the most probable outcome here. But if Rozenstruik survives round 1, if he's able to get off in the striking, he himself is very deadly. He himself is someone who I could see maybe live betting against the second round. He's a much better striker of the two, much better technically, and there's a lot of holes in Gaziev's game, including that cardio. So with that being said, give me Gaziev. I think he's my favorite play on DraftKings, 8.3K, middle of the pack, you can afford him, and he's a guy who can go out there and score you a first round finish, scoring 105, 110 points. If you prefer Rozenstruik, I don't blame you. He is the much better kickboxer, much more proven of the two, and I do think as the fight goes on, has the better cardio, but he has to survive that first round, and if that's the case, I don't know how often he's able to do so against a guy as big and powerful on the ground as Gaziev. So 8.3K, picking Gaziev. Another great fight target on DraftKings. Play both sides, but I am siding towards Shamil. That's going to do it for me, though, on the Plays and Fades YouTube channel. And quickly running through my quick picks, taking Shamil Gaziev, Vitor Petrino in a close one, Muhammad Mokaev, Umar Nurmagomedov, Steve Erceg, Eric Anders, Ludovic Klein, Javid Basharat, Christian Leroy Duncan, Bernardo Sopaj, and Al-Selwady. DraftKings-wise, one of the hardest slates I've ever dealt with. I think underdog-wise, Sopaj and Radzhabov are going to be extremely popular, and I completely see why. Play them if you're single entry. If you want to be a bit different, they are great leverage spots to get away from. I think underdog-wise, I like Sopaj and a combination of either Perez or Pedro. Two guys who I want to cheer for now, I think have a lot more chances of winning than the people around them. Up top, though, it's a big decision. Who can you afford? I think in order from the top range, I have to go Duncan, Klein, Erceg, Mokaev. I love to get to Umar. If I have the salary too, I will. So maybe throw him in there instead of a Klein. But I do like Duncan at 8.9. I think he's very good leverage. Same thing with Erceg at 9.2. I don't think people are going to be gravitating towards Umar, Mokaev, and Petrino. And if that's the case, get leverage on the other ones. It's all about leverage. And then finally, pick your side in the main event. Reignmakers wise, highest ceilings, Umar, Duncan, Klein, Gaziev, and Mokaev. Betting wise, I have nothing yet. I don't even know what I'm going to get to. Maybe I won't bet anything. Who knows? This is not my favorite card in the world. I'm not afraid to admit it, and I'm not going to force any action. But please, feel free to check me out on Twitter at GorDo. I will be posting my full slate of bets, if there are any, on Friday. And at that, guys, just enjoy the card. It's a fun one, entertainment-wise, but maybe not the best lines with DraftKings and betting. I'm much more excited for the $2.99 card next week, so be sure to check me out there. Hit the like button down below, subscribe to the channel, show some love, and we'll see you next week for a bit of a better one and a phenomenal pay-per-view, guys. So appreciate you guys checking in. Wish you guys all the best of luck in your DraftKings and betting endeavors, guys. Let's make some money.